All right, welcome back. This is the Something Venture Podcast. I'm Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest today is Jay Adelson. How you doing?
I'm great. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks so much for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure.
So Jay has founded, I think it's 14 companies. I'm going to get this wrong, but nobody's fact-checking. Founded Equinix, was the CEO of Digg, the CEO of Simple Geo, chairman and founder of Revision3, chairman and founder of Opsmatic.
That's right.
Currently on the board of Megaport.
Yeah, there's a few others in there.
Are you tired?
I'm exhausted.
That's a lot of companies to be starting.
Right, and that doesn't include the list of all the companies that I started that didn't raise any money, that we couldn't get anywhere, that failed so miserably that we'll just let history forget about them.
That's insane. Well, I normally have a plan of attack here, but I don't this time. So let's just head down this path together and see what happens. How did you make your way to Silicon Valley? Did you come as a sound were you in the land of sound engineering and radio, television?
So the shorter version is that I went to school for film and broadcasting.
Yep.
And I also went to school for computer science because I was a telecom nerd. I was like an online nerd before, bulletin board, the whole story kind of thing. Okay. And so my degree was in film. My concentration was in computer science. All my friends were computer scientists. But I was determined to work making movies and doing sound engineering when I graduated. And I got an opportunity for an internship out in Marin and decided to take my chances, pack the escargot and put it on the top of the Mazda and drive across country. And, doing these internships, and it was like Skywalker Sound and Salzance and Zoetrope and whatever, if you can get, $12 an hour, that was a lot back then. Just didn't pay the rent. And so my friends who are the computer scientists who were out here were like, hey, we'll hire you for $30,000 to just have a brain.
Right.
Because things were exploding and no one could do it.
Isn't Marin where some of this got... I talked recently to both James Kerr and Poe Bronson about kind of the origins of Silicon Valley. And it goes way, way back. So, there's the 20s where radio actually started in San Jose and then all the military stuff. But the part where the counterculture started coming together with the technical people. But the technical people were the military people. Wasn't that at Marin? Wasn't the Well and those guys?
Yeah, the Well was Marin. And CRL, Jim Couch, I think his name was.
I have a romantic view of that time because it was kind of before I'm conscious of it. But it was the first guys who were sort of coming together around computers and computers connecting people.
I think so. Well, there's a few different things going on in the Bay Area at the time, and Marin had its own sort of view. I know I'm a little biased because I was... super into movies, but Industrial Lights and Magic were up there. Alex Lindsay and all his stuff, and you had the first really advanced recording studio stuff going on. Not digital necessarily, but all that is kind of connected. From an electronic standpoint, though, people who can fix that stuff have hobbies, whether they're like radio guys or they're computer people. And so you do have a lot of technical talent up there, but I don't think it coalesced in anything that would give you a job. That was the problem.
Right.
Is that there was lots of people up there who were nerdy like me, but no one could pay me.
Right.
So I ended up commuting. I actually moved to San Rafael and was living there in 1992 and was commuting to places like Redwood City and San Jose to eat.
That's crazy.
That was nuts. And I remember I signed up with Mac Temps. Do you remember Mac Temps?
I do not remember Mac Temps.
So it was a temp agency back when no one could do anything tech. And you would go in and they would test you on Word and Excel, whatever, and how fast you could type. And then they would place you in jobs where you had to use a computer. Right?
Yeah.
And so I had some skills. So I went in there. I'm like, hey, I need some work. And they placed me at Guy Kawasaki's company.
Yeah.
In what is it? Right next to where Next was, but it was 1993.
Right.
Redwood City kind of.
Yeah.
Called Objective Software, and I was doing sales. By the way, that company like cratered, and it was like a high-end spreadsheet for the Mac. It was just.
This sounds terrible.
Well, but it was a great lesson. There's some really, really interesting people who were there. But I was commuting from San Rafael, which was just not fun. That's, for those of you who are listening, that's like, 2 hours in a time when commutes weren't really that bad in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
So that was a stupid commute.
And this was before the internet was cool, right? Or was there an internet at this point, or was it the bulletin boards?
No, there is an internet. See, this is like the, nerdy part, is that while I was in college, I was using the internet and something called BitNet to do chat with people like in China and in Europe, and thought that was the coolest thing ever. Because the bulletin boards were just like usually one user.
Yeah.
Or if they were multi-user, it was like, very, very small, domestic kind of things. And then suddenly you had this sort of international, so I was using it, and then I'll shut that down. I was using it, and I had an obsession with it. And so when I graduated, the only way that you got to use the internet when you weren't a college student was to sign up for something like CRL and Marin, which would give you a shell account on a Unix box somewhere, which from there you could, explore the internet world. And that was my first real major job in tech, was Netcom, which was selling those shell accounts.
Man.
And so hey, free internet.
Yep.
For a nerd like me, that was amazing.
That was the moment in history when I thought the internet was the coolest. When I first logged into something, now you're not aware of the space on the internet, but I was like in San Diego, and you could log into like Michigan, Minnesota had a server called it was Gopher or something like that.
Gopher, Waze, all these guys.
Veronica, I think. And you're just like, wait, I'm sitting in San Diego typing commands to a computer in like Minnesota. Like that just seemed like the most amazing thing. Like now you're just like, I don't know where the hell this is bouncing or pinging. But that feeling of like, I'm sitting here in this room controlling something halfway across the country. I don't know, for some reason that was when I was like, this is incredible.
Yeah, it was. When we, Netcom, so I went to go work for this company that created really the first commercial browser. I mean, Mosaic was there, but before Netscape, we were selling this thing called NetCruiser. And we were the first like $19.99 flat rate internet service in the world. Like, rolled that thing out. We were doing pretty well. We went public. Everything was great. But like, you get this product out there, and you find all these people just like you can, like people who like are blown away with what they can do with this, discovering things. And by the way, this is before the web, so people are like, you could buy CDs using Telnet on a product called like CD Bot or CD Baby or something like that. And you would go in Telnet and buy a CD, and they would send it to you in the mail. And I was like, wow, that's a beautiful thing. And I became pretty protective of this internet thing. And that's where things went horribly, horribly wrong. Because I started to develop a certain kind of paternal, misguided view that somehow, not misguided. I just felt like I was sort of angry that it wasn't, because there's this anarchistic sort of way that it grew. And when it became more commercial in 1994, I was one of those sort of angry people who wanted to protect it from the evil corporate interests.
That's crazy. Like, people forget that there was a phase where the idea was you shouldn't do anything commercial.
Right.
Like, you wouldn't do Amazon. Like, that was not cool. And you could get any domain name, like abc.com. You could get, sex.com, like whatever it was, just by signing up for it.
Oh, yeah.
But it wasn't cool to do it. Like, if you weren't using it, wasn't cool to go, hey, I'm going to get like sex.com and money.com and business.com and then sell them. People were just like, if you're not using it, man, don't. Don't sit on it.
So there was the internet, which was sitting in DC. There was no ICANN. There was no, the internet. There was a woman who worked there at the time. Her name was Ren Nolan.
Yes.
Now it's Ren Provo, who every single time you wanted to register a domain name, she would review your piece of paper or your email form. Yeah. And I remember having to fill out, I had 24 domain names.
Yeah.
They were free, but you had to fill out this form saying, okay, I'm a not-for-profit, so I have a .org. You can't have a .mil or .edu unless you prove you're an accredited whatever.
Army,
exactly. And yeah, there was one guy who did that for 1,000 domain names. It was called Virtual Office. And and we were scratching our heads, is this legal?
Yeah.
But there was no governing body.
Right.
And so, yeah, that changed. I was actually part of the group. So when I went over to Digital Equipment,
right,
Digital was in this weird space where they were sort of a steward for some of the core infrastructure of the internet, the core, gatekeeper, the stuff that the Usenet core servers and Paul Vixie worked there, who wrote a lot of the code.
Yeah.
And yeah, they had created, there was this working group in DC that they put me on called Core.
That's crazy. That
was going to develop what would later become ICANN, because we couldn't figure out how to govern this thing.
Yeah.
It was just such a weird Wild West.
It's crazy that there's a whole book about, I forget what it's called. It's got the word band in it. It's something with women. But it's about the early women of the internet. And there were a bunch of women doing I can't remember what they were, but super key things. Like the fact that you had to contact that woman.
Yeah.
She was kind of like the directory.
Yeah, she works at Apple now, by the way. She's awesome. Yeah. By the way, all these people still know each other. We're all still friends.
Yeah.
All these years later. And, you had Kathy Aronson. You had all these incredible women who basically invented, more than half of the technology we all use. But back then, nobody was waving flags. There was no internet celebrity.
Right.
Did
you how far in the future did anybody see at that time? Were you like, this is really going to replace CB radios someday? Or did anybody have any idea?
Well, I mean, I remember being in a room with my co-founder of Equinix, Al Avery, who was with me at Digital Equipment.
Yeah. Equinix is the
largest data center company in the world.
Yep.
Something like 70 to 85% of all the world's internet traffic uses it to get from one network to the other, the whole inter part of the internet.
Yeah.
But anyway, this was back in 1997, 1998. I remember sitting in a room with him and having a heated discussion over how commercial the internet could be. And the issue was that there was a complete lack of trust on the part of, the corporations and really the media about how the internet worked.
Yeah.
And you couldn't do commerce really on it at a large scale, because people didn't trust it yet, or maybe it hadn't earned the trust yet.
Right.
And so part of I haven't even really thought about this in so many 20 years, but I remember as part of our, early mission building, or, whatever you want to call it, positioning for the business, we were well, how do we get trust into all of this?
Yeah.
When we wanted to be neutral and all these things, and we wanted to scale the internet, but I mean, really what was going on at the time was, I don't think a lot of people believed that it would be as incredibly commercial as it became, and as powerful a force, both for good and evil, as it became.
So how did you start, fund, and build a data center then, if most people are thinking it's not going to be that commercial?
Well, so Digital Equipment had a research project that was going on in the basement called the Palo Alto Internet Exchange, which I was running with Al Avery. Al was the general manager. I was the operations manager. And this was originally a paper that was written by Brian Reed, and I think maybe co-authored by Paul Vixie and Stephen Stewart there. And basically they had started this experiment, and I was brought in to kind of operate it and build it and scale it. Mm-hmm. And Al, who was the product manager for the DEC Alpha computer, was brought in by Bob Supnick, the VP of R&D, to come and run this as a business unit. And the only other business unit that existed inside of R&D was Alta Vista, which was right above us. Like we all hung out together every day. And when we were there, the goal was about networks, right? It was not about building data centers. It was about the exchange of network traffic. So the thought process goes, if you want all the major networks in the world to connect to each other in the room, they have to believe that the room is super secure, incredibly reliable, right? Has all these sort of newfangled technologies to allow them to feel comfortable. Because before this point, they would have their central offices and they would all control their own buildings and not trust each other. Yeah. So to have one player in the middle do this, we'd have to build not just a data center, but a very special one that would gain the trust of all of these companies. Right. So we started to have to learn how to build a data center. And when we researched it, we're like, oh, these data centers are really shitty. I mean, they're really bad.
Yeah, right.
I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on your podcast.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, I'm sorry about it. But they were just really wet, not places for corporations to put anything.
Yeah.
And so we're like, well, how do we do this? Anyway, fast forward, years later, Equinix is building these giant data centers because people figured out that not only do you put the network infrastructure there, but when the network infrastructure is there, it makes sense to put right next to it Yahoo or Google or whatever, or your porn site or whatever it is that you want to have operate really, really well at the core of the internet, you put there. And so our data centers had to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Right.
And next thing, and everyone thinks of Equinix as a data center company, but the people who started it, like me, we think of it as a network, interconnection company. And actually, the Wall Street thinks of them as a network interconnection company because that's why they survived when all the other data center companies died after the NASDAQ crash.
Yep.
It was all because they had this core network infrastructure.
Wow. And so you became like a real estate it's real estate, right? Like, did you have to figure out how to, build buildings and cool things?
And now you know why I left in 2005.
Oh, man.
Well, I mean, I came up with the designs with a good team.
Yeah.
And then, tried to innovate around the network services inside. I had this great R&D team.
Right.
Had this guy, Ted Hardy, who was like, one of the guys who wrote, some of the original, worldwide, HTML, RFCs and Sean Donnellan, who built the most safest, most secure data centers ever for government libraries. And
right.
I had this great team of basically scientists
right.
coming up with technologies that you could only come up with at the core of the internet because there was no other place to really test these things. So we invented things like commercial web caching, which would later become CDNs and Akamai. And we came up with, intelligent routing, and we came up with Anycast DNS, concept. All these kinds of things that we were doing, and then we were like, oh, this isn't really a product.
Right.
It's really a value-added service, so we'll just go ahead and publish a white paper, and then 3 companies get billion-dollar valuations based on it. But
so do people ever really try to break into a data center? And what would you do if you got in? They've got the hand scanners and the man traps, and it's all very cool, but do people ever really try to break in?
It's happened. It doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
Most of the security there was designed around this issue of multi-tenancy. So if you have 100 or 200 different companies in the same room, all of them with some pretty, black hat network engineers working for them, all walking in proximity to each other, there's some minimum levels of security you put in more as a deterrent.
Right.
We had theft. We had people trying to break into cages. We had situations where an entire division of Microsoft was basically cut due to their own internal security issue. And that group of people had the only access to the San Jose network infrastructure cage. And then we had to go back and forth with Microsoft because they kept saying, you have to let us in there. And we're like, you're not on the list. And they're like, well, we've just fired everybody on the list. And we're like, well, sorry. And it escalates and escalates. But that's the kind of thing that would happen all the time. So security was relevant.
Yeah.
But, cybersecurity was more relevant.
And it's always struck me there's got to be some place, no matter how big, it's kind of ridiculous, but no matter how big you build, like how much you build in a data center, at some point, doesn't a cable have to leave and go into the dirt?
That's right.
Somewhere, like there's just this cable going into the dirt.
Oh, Andrew Blum wrote this book about this called Tubes.
Yes, tubes. It turns out that Senator was right. It is a series. The internet is, in fact, a series of tubes.
Well, yeah. I mean, I know that somewhere out there, Bill Norton, who was one of the guys who was with me when we were advising Congress and trying to educate them about how the internet worked, and we used the analogy of pipes.
Yeah.
It's kind of embarrassing that you're partially responsible for that.
Yeah.
That joke.
But at some point there is a physical
there is
infrastructure, and it goes under oceans, and it's like it's off the coast of South America.
I heard that Equinix is laying their first undersea fiber cable that they own.
Wow.
Like I heard this. I don't know. I'm pretty sure it's true. And if that's true, that's crazy.
Right.
It is insane. And so, there is a huge amount of infrastructure that we all sort of depend on, and it just works.
Right.
And it's just magical.
But at some point it runs into the ocean.
Runs in the ocean. And you can imagine just from an internet, like I love the internet, but I also love using the internet.
Yep.
And sometimes it gets a little exhausting laying road. You want to drive the car.
Yeah, exactly. So what was it like? You took this thing public. What the heck is that like?
Remember, I didn't just take it public. So we were taking it public at a time when corporations were being highly scrutinized because of, sort of Enron was in process, and there was like lots of other like telecom issues and corruption going on in the world. We had the NASDAQ crashing.
Yep.
Literally, this was August of 2000.
Yep.
And the NASDAQ is crashing.
Yeah.
Goldman is, underwriting, it's Solomon, and we're going public. And like, I've never, ever, like, this was my first road show I had been on. We had already raised, I think at that point, hundreds of millions of dollars as a company. And I had no business whatsoever talking to the street at this point in my career.
Right.
I was 29.
Yeah.
I turned 30 a month after our IPO.
Wow.
And I thought I would be rich for my whole life.
And why weren't you rich
because
for your whole life?
NASDAQ crashed.
Oh, for God's sake, NASDAQ.
32-for-1 reverse split, man.
Oh, that's just crazy.
Yeah, but I mean, imagine the incredible experience.
Yeah.
I mean, coming off of that battle,
right.
the scarring, whatever you want to call it, like that is the best school that I could have possibly gone to.
That's right.
About the realities and misconceptions of things like equity and how to deal. After the NASDAQ crashed, all of the recession that followed and all of the layoffs and all the issues in Silicon Valley with venture firms, talk about a lesson.
Yeah.
And that paved the way for me to kind of figure things out.
What do you think near misses in Silicon Valley? Like there's a guy named Josh Felser, has a venture capital firm now.
I know him well.
NASDAQ crashed in August, right? I think he had a company called Spinner, that I think he sold AOL in like April. So I think he sold his company for several $100 million in April. And then you took your company public like
in August.
In a different world.
Yes.
4 months later.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's a pattern. If Brenda, my wife, was sitting here next to me right now, she'd say, "Hey, you have this incredible ability to time things just when it's the worst time to do something, like selling Digg to Google or or whatever it might be." Look, it's just going to happen. You're going to have things that are appropriately timed and things that aren't, and you just kind of keep trying.
Right.
I don't think you can guess timing, really.
No. And I think, too, you forget, like, most people in the world and in Silicon Valley didn't even have an Equinix.
Right.
So it's not even in their mind that they just barely missed something because they weren't even, like, playing the game.
Right. Although if you barely miss something a few times,
yeah,
it starts to kind of wear at your soul a little bit.
So how did you make your path out of Equinix onto the next?
Well, my wife gave me an ultimatum. She said that we have to move out east. So we were living in San Francisco, and then we moved to rural New York, a town called Pauling. Whoa. And it's funny because like literally I show up there and my neighbor who shows up with a pie, walks up to my door and is like, hey, welcome to the neighborhood. What do you do? And I said, oh, I'm the founder and CTO of a data center company. And he's like, I'm the founder and CTO of a data center company.
Really?
Yeah. Servalis, a guy named Rob Carlson. And like, it was just really funny because what are the chances of that? Well, it looks like I wasn't the only person who was trying to get out of Dodge. Like Brenda was like, maybe if we get Jay out of tech, he'll stop founding companies and stop being obsessed, Yeah. Well, that didn't happen. So I just founded 2 companies based in San Francisco within 6 months of landing there.
And was Digg one of those companies?
Digg was, well. So yeah. So the official story is that we founded Revision3 first.
Yeah.
And Digg was founded by Kevin Rose as sort of his side project. And I helped him with all that, because I was mentoring him at the time with Revision3. And I basically, helped him get it launched and really, was CEO of this project.
Right.
He certainly didn't want to do that.
Right.
And yeah, so at the same time, which by the way, do not recommend to all your listeners, do not start 2 companies and be CEO of both of them at the same time. That doesn't actually work.
Yeah, you're not Steve Jobs.
I don't even think Steve Jobs is Steve Jobs. Like I think a company suffers when you're split. And I think Greylock figured that out and made me choose. And I ended up taking Digg.
Right.
And then really that was in many ways a mistake, but what a great ride Digg was.
So Revision3 was to be like what, a studio kind of thing?
An internet television network.
Yeah.
And it was before YouTube. So we were like coming up with original content.
Yeah.
And coming up with ways to allow people to download it.
Yeah.
And then later stream it when that became a thing.
That's the other kind of near miss in Silicon Valley too, where you've got kind of the right idea, but you twist it like Get Around.
Right.
They had the same idea as Uber and Lyft, which is cars sit empty, unused 98% of the time. So let's let people share their cars. And people don't really want to do that. They want rides in cars.
Well, that's true. But to come to Get Around's defense, they figured that out really quickly and allowed and changed their model and actually are doing pretty well. And so, we all sort of pay attention to the ride sharing companies like Uber and Lyft, but you might want to look at Get Around because they're kind of a player right now.
I got nothing against Get Around.
Yeah. I'm just saying it's like, but you're right. It's, it just depends on the tweak of the model. Revision3 got the content right. We built the largest audiences. We had the most downloads. We were the first really to monetize video with that sort of, traditional sponsorship methodology.
You were creating all the content, right?
We were creating the content, informed content. Now, so the reason it was called Revision3 was because a bunch of my friends were, ZD TV and Tech TV.
Right.
And this would be like the 3rd iteration. When we marketed that later, we were like, oh, the first thing is television, and then the next thing is cable, and now it's internet television, and that's the 3rd revision.
Right.
That's not why we called it Revision3. We actually called it that because it was, a bunch of veterans. And the PR people who helped me build that are going to just be upset that I revealed that secret.
Oh, man.
But come on. So Revision3 gets out there, and it's really about innovating around monetization and building community. Right. And it did a great job. It's just that the companies that then would repurpose our content, like YouTube, like Apple, and to some extent, all of these sort of distribution networks, really figured out that creating content is expensive and low margin by comparison. Although, so Revision3 sold to Discovery Channel in 2012. companies after that, so the companies that hung around, like the two big ones, we were probably the biggest, and then Next New Networks was like a number two or maybe on par, and they got sold to YouTube. Revision3 went to Discovery, and then a few companies that were out there that kind of hung around and were toying with the gamer world. Mm-hmm. You know, Machinima and, you know, other content models too. There was people who would sell to Disney, and there was a number of different sort of acquisitions, and they kept going up in value.
Right.
And if we had just kind of hung out,
yep.
And Jim Louderback, who was CEO, you know, there was a huge debate at the time, because I remember we just weren't sure if we could survive another couple of years. Like, the market was changing so fast, we just didn't know where it was going to go. So we'll never know.
Right.
But that might have been one of those. And the company was doing fine.
Right.
It was just a question of, you know, it was a venture-backed startup, and it had been like 7-8 years.
Right. So it was time.
So entrepreneurs, yes, when you get to year 7 or 8,
yeah,
it's a very interesting change in behavior in your board of directors.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, they are not on your side.
You are no longer aligned.
Exactly. It's kind of crazy that in preparing for this podcast, I watched a bunch of videos of like.
Oh no.
It's I got to say, Silicon Valley people doing interviews on video is not a great art form. Like, I got to say, the video just doesn't add a lot. Mm-mm. And it's kind of funny that podcasting now has emerged.
Right.
Like, a lot of people are like, I'm cool. I can listen to Mark Maron. I don't need to see the video. I'm going for. It's just kind of crazy that you would, if you'd sat down 8 years ago and go, I think audio is going to really be the way that people are getting all this stuff.
We believed it. I mean, Digg launched a product called Digg Podcasts.
Wow.
Little known fact that had a lot of the features of these apps that you're using today to find, discover, subscribe to, you know, and monetize podcasts. But no one cared about podcasts in, what was that, 2007?
Yeah, right.
If I had launched that product in an app form today, everyone would love it, right? But yeah, no one thought. And that's the problem. No one thought that it was a good idea back then.
Yeah.
And now and
then it just worked.
It just worked.
So Digg was an enormous thing.
Yeah.
Like, at the time. It was I don't know, like, what's replaced it? Like, anything? Or?
You know, some people would say immediately, like, their immediate reaction is Reddit replaced Digg. Mm. You know, I think that's missing something.
Yeah.
I think that Digg, being the first of what it did, it borrowed heavily from other concepts like Joshua Schachter and Delicious, you know, the Slashdot people. But it was the first to really popularize this sort of crowdsourcing thing. It was really the first time you ever embedded a button for a website or for an idea like that. It was the first time you had a thumbs up. It was the Digg button. Yeah. Digg had a patent on the like button. That ended up being part of the value when Digg got sold. So when you think about it, there's this whole sort of like capturing of a time when tech was becoming cool, when teenagers, really teenagers, let's just call it what it is. Yeah. Teenagers, you know, maybe up to 25-year-olds were a generation that were using these products every single day. Whereas, like, previously it was only tech people. Now it was sort of more of a general consumption thing. And so when I talk to people who now have aged up, you know, 10 years since then, they're like, oh yeah, this was like, I lived on Digg.
Right.
And it was social news. We called it social news. It was supposed to be a crowd ranked, you know, sort of front page of a newspaper.
Yeah.
And that was our goal. That was my goal, democratizing news.
YouTube seems like it really took a lot of that concept, like viewer counts and things like that.
It does, except remember that, you know, YouTube has struggled with its front page for many years. Like, people don't go to YouTube's front page to discover content, because the way you discover content on YouTube is someone shares it to you.
Yeah.
And this notion of sharing, it seems obvious to you today, but in 2005, what did sharing mean? Sending someone a text? No, that didn't work because you didn't have a smartphone.
Right.
It meant, maybe emailing someone the link, maybe sending them to them on their AOL Instant Messenger on their client on their desktop. You didn't really have, sharing hadn't really developed yet. And so social bookmarking was interesting because it said, hey, I'm going to mark a bunch of things as important.
Yeah.
And then those things can be consumed later by someone visiting the site or shared through whatever medium you want to share. And this is where things got a little bit confusing, because do I subscribe to an individual?
Right.
Or do I look at the aggregate of what everyone is talking about? And I think Twitter kind of really got the whole individual part right.
Yeah.
Really nailed that.
Yeah.
And Twitter also came after Digg, right? And so, and imagine our jealousy as Twitter took off.
Right.
And then on the other side, you had the social networking part, like what are your friends doing?
Mm-hmm.
And some of what I think killed Digg was that battle between, do I care more about what my friends are thinking, and what my friends do, or do I care about sort of the aggregate? And I was more of this, I don't know, lefty. I'm like, sort of the aggregate guy. And I think Kevin was more sort of really an innovator around the friend stuff and around that kind of stuff. And like where we conflicted was in that sort of sense of obligation.
Right.
But yeah, that was where we were. And so what is even close to what Digg is today? I don't really think anything really captures it. It was something about the time and the passion of the community that we had that was just, I haven't seen anything like it since.
I can see the Reddit comparison, but maybe not precisely. I mean, Twitter really, they just took out the friction of the two-way friend request as part of what they did. And so you just ended up with this sort of like, I can just infinitely follow people. And then Instagram kind of extracted that out of both Facebook and Twitter at the end of the day.
I'm turning off my phone in case people on the podcast want to know why I'm doing this. Yeah, I agree completely. I have a belief that there were these accidental moments where these companies sort of captured communities that then defined them.
Yeah.
And then they had trouble getting escape velocity from that initial identity.
Interesting. Yeah.
And when an industry like tech is evolving so quickly, you can't sit on your original plan. You have to keep reinventing yourself. And so what happens is that mode of communication becomes obsolete for various reasons. You could argue Facebook. People are very well aware that if they just look at what their friends are doing, they're not getting the whole picture anymore, right? And so it's like things become obsolete.
Yeah.
And so then what do? You have to reinvent yourself. And almost no companies are capable of reinventing themselves. Very few have been able to do that.
You probably just get big like Facebook, and then you don't reinvent yourself. You just use your balance sheet to buy
companies.
Buy the other things that people are doing.
Well, I mean, that might work. Apple has done a very good job, I think, of both building internally and acquiring technology and actually productizing it. There's sort of, I think, a debate is out around Google doing that. I think that in certain areas, Google's done a good job of that, and so has Microsoft. But what if you're the new guy who's grown up on this identity? What if you're Foursquare?
Yeah, right.
And you explode with popularity, and it was fun, and it was cool, and now you got to change. I mean, you get a couple tries.
Right.
And sometimes you might get one iteration right.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to do. And I think that that sort of defines why it's not crazy for an entrepreneur to sell.
Right.
Because if you know that there's a cycle of 5 to 6, 7 years for a tech company to really, hit the product market fit, doesn't it make sense to kind of create some liquidity and move on to your next project?
Yeah, for sure. That's why it's so interesting. Like, the future seems so uncertain, but then as it passes, it's very clear. Like I started a company, you were in this space too, that sort of check-in space. And check-ins came out and we were like, oh, this is great. You can our idea was that you develop loyalty by going to a store and checking in, and then you become bronze and silver and gold, like checking in. But then it turns out that what you did with location was probably call a car, and that's Uber.
Right.
But that, in your imagination, we thought we were thinking of all the different things you could do with a check-in. Like you check in a restaurant or a bar or a police station.
Guess what?
Yeah.
Then you're done.
You can be mayor or you can get loyalty. Like nobody went, nah, what if you call a car? Well, somebody did. They're really rich now, but...
I was sitting in a room with Matt Galligan and Joe Stump, who were the founders of Simple Geo in 2010 or 2009, where I come in to take over as CEO, and we're sitting in a room and we're talking about our product, which by the way allowed you to embed location in an app in 2010.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And part of it was so you could check in, or so you could whatever you wanted to do with location, and place data. Right.
Right.
And I said, okay, how many developers are using our product? And they're like, more than anyone else has. We have 20,000 developers using our product and embedding our SDK and doing all these things. And I said, oh, great. How many of them actually result in profitable, successful apps? Well, actually, none of them right now, because the profitable, successful apps all came out before we launched. And so far, nothing on our platform. I'm like, so how many of our customers can actually pay us?
Right.
Oh, none? Well, maybe we need to rethink this business model because there just isn't enough applications in 2010. Now, everyone acknowledges the mission critical nature that embedding location and location awareness caused. Yeah. I remember like an interview with Time Magazine, like this is right then. I think I remember Michael Arrington was sitting next to me and Philip Rosedale, and we're all talking about what are the big innovations. And I was like, location. This is why I took this job.
Right.
And it's true.
Right.
It just, does that equate to dollars?
Right.
For a startup?
Yeah.
And that's a very different problem to solve.
Right. So what do you make of it looking back on this not nearly finished career? But these you were there at the location services thing. You're like Zelig. You were there at the social networking, whatever you want to call it. Digg.
Internet Zelig.
You built the...
Or Forrest Gump.
Yeah. Forrest Gump. You built the data center that's the biggest in the world. What do you kind of look... But when you meet the junior product manager at Facebook who made $92 million because she got there and did something, what do you kind of make of it?
First of all, she's buying the drinks.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
All right. I love it.
Yeah.
When I run into a product manager. And by the way, this happens at Equinix every day. I mean, Equinix is a $35, $38 billion company right now. It's an S&P 500.
Right.
People I hired there to be reception are millionaires.
Right.
Which is wonderful.
Yeah.
It fills me with a certain amount of joy when I see people do well from these particularly big companies. Friends of mine that went to go work at Google and made out really well. This happens all the time. That doesn't bug me. I think what bugs me is the people who make money from the failures who are not the entrepreneurs. Okay, so what bugs me is there's a whole supply chain. I'm not just talking about venture. There's a whole supply chain of people who really take advantage of the sheer volume of businesses that are going to start and blow out. And, I don't want to be a bitter guy, but the ones that are billionaires from that group, I'm that money belongs to someone else.
How does that work? What's the mechanism of those?
Well, sometimes it's fine. If you're just selling shovels to miners, that's great, because, you're helping everybody.
Right.
But, if you're, the classic example of this is the people who sell, the bad mortgages.
Right.
That's what I kind of feel happens, for example, in venture capital when the bar is too low to make investments and, when there's too many funds. Mm-hmm. The money has to go somewhere. And so what's happening? Well, they're taking home their management fees.
Right.
And they're getting paid. And they're getting paid sometimes as much as, $300, $500, $1 million a year in management fees, while the entrepreneur is being asked to either pay themselves nothing or pay themselves half of market. Right. And sometimes for years.
Right.
And that's something needs to figure itself out there because on one hand, there just shouldn't be as many, bad ideas getting funded. And that would be part of the solution. But the other thing is there should be more shared risk, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, I tried to be a VC for a while. I say all these things and this is the model that evolved.
Right.
Putting on a Andy Ratcliffe hat for a minute. It's like there's a reason things have evolved the way they have.
Right.
But when I look at it, it doesn't bug me at all when somebody gets rich from this stuff on the entrepreneurial side. It kind of bugs me when the wrong people get rich from it on the supply chain side.
I mean, imagine it's a little bit like, I don't know, an aluminum bat in baseball or like tennis graphite rackets where the game was designed, it worked a certain way. Like the venture capitalists would invest like at a $6 million valuation and the company and they get paid like a banker, maybe like a commercial banker, and then the thing would take off. And they'd make money, but then I think so much money went into it that the management fee went from being their salary so that they could, help companies to being in and of itself a freaking gold mine. Like, the management fees on like $4 or $5 million wasn't that. The management fees on like $600 million, your retirement plan can be just don't get fired for 6 years.
Exactly. Well, and, VCs always talk about aligning of interests, right? Yeah. And so are the interests aligned in that situation? Sometimes, at the beginning, sometimes. It's just that we have to make sure that we reward people properly for, their talent. We have to carefully distinguish between that person's value actually is the deployment of that capital.
Right.
That's actually their value. Sometimes their value is mentorship, right? Or whatever. But if they actually are mentoring, are they getting rewarded for that? How would you, if you were going to redo the compensation model for board members, let's just say board members in general, how would you redo it? Right.
Right.
And entrepreneur mentorship. And I've been advising entrepreneurs since basically I started. It's what I actually like to do more than I don't like to operate nearly as much as I like to advise.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I can't eat doing that.
Yeah.
But I've been doing this for a long time. And what I realized through this whole process is that there isn't actually enough mentorship going on.
Right.
There's not enough apprenticeship going on. Imagine if a graduate walked out of, Stanford Business School and was told and really believed in their heart of hearts that for the next 5 years, the right thing to do is to shadow a bunch of, management professionals in their job versus jump right in with all their, academic knowledge and just start. I think many of us would agree that the quality of work would change and this idea of apprenticeship and mentorship would change, and we would value it more in business, in Silicon Valley, than we have been. And I want to get back to that somehow. I want to find ways to incent that behavior.
Yeah. I mean, it's so asymmetrical. I mean, you get like a person out of college starting a company. Like they don't know. Like the VCs have seen thousands and thousands of companies. They know all the tricks. They can beat you at the game. It's their game. Like it's difficult for you to win from that. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you worked in industry for like 10 or 15 years, you know a couple things too.
Absolutely.
But right out of school, like the VC is such an advantage over you in terms of like seeing things, having one penny in your thing and one penny in 1,000 other things.
And you will get great mentorship. I was 26, 27 when I got my first VC investment from Benchmark.
Yeah.
And frankly, the whole Benchmark team for the first couple of years were really useful I mean, not just useful. They would keep secrets from me. Like I could go to them with a weakness and not be afraid.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's different now, because while I totally approve of the idea of founder CEOs, I think that's a great idea. I think that we've created an environment where you feel like you're on the chopping block and you're so scared that the last person on earth you're going to go seek advice from is your VC. Sorry, VCs. Yeah. I'm really sorry, but this is just the truth. Right. And I talk to hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs who all echo this. They're not going to be 100% honest and transparent with where their weak spots are. So who's going to be that? And the VC finding an independent board member, that is not going to make any difference. Right. And so this is so I do think that you do get some mentorship from them, and you can get some great direction, but to put it in perspective, I chose to be the CTO of the company I founded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Guess what? You feel a lot more comfortable asking questions with your board and with your venture firm.
Yep.
When you're not the person who's going to get crucified for making a wrong decision.
Yeah.
Oh, but we don't crucify for it. Bullshit. Yeah. Yes, you do.
Yeah, I've always found like the number 2 role, like the sort of operating role, like pretty satisfying. Like,
oh, it's great.
Sheryl Sandberg seems to like it. Tim Cook liked it. Yeah. Like, it's pretty good. Sometimes you're like, okay, that's the guy or the woman who hears the music and is the visionary. I understand it once they say it, but I'm not writing the music. I can play it. I can't write it.
Yeah.
And that's like, for me, that's fine. Some people can't stand being less than CEO, and like a different thing.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. I mean, I don't think it's all from ego. I think that some people literally have been in a place where not being in control has hurt them in the past.
Yeah.
I chose to be a CEO after being the CTO, partly because I wanted to be in control and I didn't want to have those risks of not being in control,
right?
Or getting cut from your own business, at least without knowing it's coming. But I can't. It's such a lonely job.
Yeah.
And when your company does well, and this is the piece that I've heard many young entrepreneurs kind of look at me and roll their eyes like, bullshit, you're not telling the truth, but I am. Once your company's doing well, that's where it starts, where suddenly there is this weird pressure to keep things that great. And it starts with that.
Yep.
It also, that when the company's doing well, that's when the CEO usually starts getting some celebrity.
Yep.
And so there's some interesting dynamics that cause to your founding team. There's a bunch of things that happen right about then that makes the job incredibly lonely and incredibly stressful. And my favorite part is the first couple of years before that point, building and I think that there's some people that really thrive on that part.
Yeah.
And do really well during those transitions, or do really well, operating a public company.
Yeah. It is pretty, that happened at Friendster, where like I came in after a bunch of failed CEOs and kind of turned it around and like became biggest social network in Asia, 7th largest website in the world, which caused the VCs to become really interested.
Right.
They're like, oh, hey, now there's a thing here, and we need to do things to it. We need to
micromanage it.
Right. We need to bring other bigger executives. And if we had just like not done well, they would have not cared as much. So you kind of become this shiny object that they need to interact with, maybe to your benefit, maybe not to your benefit.
Well, I remember, when I was fired from Digg, what a couple of the board members said to me at the time was, "You've done an excellent job, and you've been rewarded for that excellent job. We think that it will require a different person to scale the business to the next level." Now, it was a very much a canned response, because that's not actually what was going on behind the scenes at Digg.
Yeah.
But it was interesting kind of statement, because they were right about that.
Yeah.
They were 100% right about that. They needed to get somebody else to, really do this next part, because it was killing me. Yeah. And it is really hard. And I kept being CEO, but of smaller businesses after that. And sometimes I'm, technically a CEO because I start a business and I'm hunting for one.
Right.
And during that period.
Right. The joke we always make about venture capital, so they have that, you've scaled it up. Now we need someone to come in. Yet in their own venture capital firms, when they go from being a $30 million fund to $100 million to $150, they scaled just fine.
Oh yeah.
Like they're never like, now that this is a $300 million fund, we really need to bring in somebody from New York. And nope, they scaled just fine. It's so ridiculous.
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, there's hypocrisy, but there's also, we keep coming back for more venture.
Well, and there is that thing where you wake up some days, you go, I don't know, I just sat down with this guy who told me he's going to cure cancer with some quantum computing thing, and he might. Like, it's not, probably not, but I have conversations like that you probably don't have on the bond trading floor, at Goldman Sachs.
I just think it's time. There's just too many old white dudes running Silicon Valley.
Hey, some of my best friends are old white dudes.
I'm an old white dude, but I'm just saying it's like we're just sort of, we keep feeding it.
That's right.
Right? That's why I'm like kind of focused on small business right now. I'm like advising people, but like what I want to do is small business.
Well, to finish up on this, what do you think in the scope of the relatively brief time you spent? How do you think Silicon Valley's changed over? I mean, the numbers have changed from like, hey, if it's successful, it's worth $300 million to like, if it's successful, it's worth $400 billion. Whatever it is. I mean, how do you think the ethos has changed through time?
Well, there's a couple factors. I mean, I think Silicon Valley that I grew up in was very much an offshoot of corporate America, traditional corporate America. Cube culture and Initech kind of experiences, and where the manager could ask you to work on the weekend, and you'd be like, "Oh crap, I have to come in on Sunday."
Yeah,
that was a real thing that happened, and there was this sense that you work for the company, and the company didn't necessarily work for you. And there were bad parts of that, and there were really the good parts of that were learning, respect, sort of work ethic. People sort of developed a sort of thicker skin around how hard they worked and sort of what was expected of them. Entitlement didn't exist at the level it does today, right? Yeah. But there are huge bad problems of that, which I think Office Space does a good job of illustrating.
Right.
We as the pendulum shifted in Web 2.0 and the entrepreneurs became more powerful in the equation and younger, and the valuations went up, and the people who were investing in companies were millionaires that were themselves founder success stories. And sort of what happened was that shifted, the entitlement shifted, the amount of money shifted, and that was refreshing at the time in 2002 and 2004 and 2008. It was really refreshing, and I think it was really playful. And at first, nobody got hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now what's happened is it's like stale. The money got so intense, and you know what they say about money and power. I think Me Too, okay, to put it in context, was going on the whole time.
For sure, yeah.
But I think that part of like the craziness that happened in that shift was way more bad behavior.
Mm-hmm.
On all levels, business decisions, sexism, financial decisions, and Silicon Valley sort of, lost something, something important, something, it's sort of there was a connection between everyone where you felt like you were part of something, when you see, the various movies about early Silicon Valley and Steve Jobs hanging the pirate flag outside, and, that whole feeling wasn't just limited to your company. It was just part of this whole community. And now it's just adversarial. It's us versus them. It's It's, the really powerful, successful, and, the folks who are barely able to pay their rents in this obnoxiously expensive
it is crazy
area. And, will the pendulum swing back? I mean, I think it might already be happening with kind of the fall of the big internet powers, and the fall, that's a strong statement.
Right.
But the scrutiny on it.
Well, let me ask you, to kind of wrap up, what do you think? How do you feel about the future? Like, what do you?
Super optimistic. I will tell you right now that we're in a dark time, and I wake up every morning and I have to tell my children it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
We're going to get through it. And, while I close my eyes and I think to myself, wow, this is actually pretty bad. Like, I have to, be careful here. But I just believe I believe in us. I believe that we can get through it. And I think that from a technology and Silicon Valley standpoint, we may not be the number one leader in the world or whatever everyone thinks that they were.
Right.
But so what? We have some incredible creativity.
Yeah.
We have some beautiful people here. Beautiful, humans.
That's right.
And we just have to kind of get out from under, some of this sort of corrupting influences.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we've done this thing.
All right. You're gonna play some pinball with me?
Oh yeah.
Are you gonna come?
Tell me about the pinball.
No. I just want to know, will you play?
Yes, I will play pinball.
All right. So to wrap up, everyone needs to play pinball.
Yeah, it's really nice. It's very mechanical, very straightforward. So this is great.
All right.
Pinball.
You have to try it.
Thanks so much for doing this.
All right. I'll talk to you later.
All right. This has been the Something Venture podcast. I'm Kent Lindstrom. Talk to you next time.